Okay, welcome to episode 2 of The Graded Escape. I'm Anna Mizzarelli.
I'm Kelley Linden.
During our last episode, we were able to introduce ourselves, and we talked a lot about our previous experience as educators. And we gave a quick summary of sort of where we started and how you can start your own homeschooling journey.
Yeah, so for today's episode, we really wanted to get into all of those fun homeschooling myths that you come across. So whether you're thinking about homeschooling or if you already are, chances are you've heard one, if not all, of these myths about some part of homeschooling. And maybe you're even worried about them like I was. So today we're going to jump into those myths, so go ahead, ask us about socialization. You know you want to.
Yes, we had to put that as our top myth because it's probably the most discussed and talked about, and definitely the one that I've been asked about the most and received probably the most, I don't want to say criticism, but questioning about. And we'll preface that this episode we also have our children running around, so
being social.
Yeah, being social. So bear with us while we try to get this information to you. So yeah, socialization. That was definitely one of the first things that was asked to me when I was going to homeschool. I remember neighbors being like, "Oh, you're not going to, take part in the, public school. We have a great district here, whatever." And or when I was pulling my son out and saying homeschool was the way we were going to go. "Oh, well, why? Don't you want him to have friends?" Like that kind of thing. And it was like, "Oh, yeah, we're not going to be, hermits in the basement." And yeah, and I just remember, I always felt like that was the myth too that I felt the most defensive about. I don't know. Like other ones I felt like I could speak to in a different way, but it was almost like you have to go on, or I felt like this need to go on the defense and like prove you wrong that my kid's going to be better off. And it's not, better or worse. It's a different style of educating your kid. And but yet with this myth, for some reason, and I don't know if other homeschooling parents could relate or feel the same way, but it was the one that I really felt the most I had to defend it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the most pervasive. I think it's the one, for whatever reason, when homeschooling maybe first started, the model was different. Yeah. Maybe there wasn't as much availability with social groups or whatever it might be. So I think it is definitely one that has persisted. And when people think of homeschooling kids, maybe they have this vision of just like that they're weird or they're socially inept or whatever it might be. So I think that's why we hear it so much, because maybe that's the only association that the general public has heard about homeschooling, that like, oh, they don't socialize. And that's just so far away from the truth.
Yeah, it's such a, like you said, pervasive myth, and also one that's so easily debunked as soon as you actually like dive into it or even talk about what socialization is, which is sort of where we were going to start with this, and what it means to have your kid be socialized. You can debunk it so quickly, but yet it stays a very prominent myth in the community. But I think we actually had to look up what the myth was of socialization, like defining it. So we looked it up in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and the definition of socialization is actually the process beginning during childhood by which individuals acquire the values, habits, and attitudes of a society, which I think I said to you right away was like, well, that sounds like the job of a parent to me, when I think about like if that's the definition. And so I think a lot of parents who, when they ask that question, non-homeschooling parents are thinking more along the lines of being social, as in like developing social skills, how to communicate and cooperate and make friendships. And I think they're thinking more along those lines of being social versus what the actual term of socialization is. Right. Which I thought was kind of an important thing to, to separate, because they're not the same thing. Defining socialization, a lot of parents probably view it more under the guise of developing, maintaining friendships, peer relationships, being able to problem solve effectively and efficiently. I think there's that idea that the proximity of being accessible to other kids, that all of a sudden equals great social skills. Right. And that these skills are being explicitly taught and learned in schools, which, again, from our perspective as former educators in the classroom, we're going to dive into a little bit of what socialization from our experience looked like in the classroom. And it's probably different than what, parents are thinking it is. I don't know, or it's not as explicit as maybe some parents think that it is. And so it is also worth noting that there are no studies that conclusively prove that children need to be in an institutional school setting in order to be socialized or receive a social education. There are, however, countless studies that support positive outcomes of the homeschooling method. So again, another kind of important thing to note, I think.
And we agree, we encourage everyone to do your own research, right? Like, you can go out there, I don't know how many peer-reviewed studies there are, but look for those peer-reviewed studies from academic journals, not just like a random article from, some sort of website, because chances are it's going to be pretty biased. But do your own research, and if you don't necessarily take our word for it, go out there.
We're going to link
see what's available.
Specific, some links to some certain studies that have been done that we found helpful to sort of go through. That will be linked in the show notes. So check those out, and then again,
do your own research. This is again, our opinion, and then the literature that we found, that does support that your homeschool child can develop effective social skills.
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember when I first started to look into that, when I realized that there was no real reason, or I couldn't find studies that showed the importance of being in that kind of school setting for the 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And it was sort of like, well, then why do we have that schedule? And it very quickly became apparent that the top reason, there was others, but the very top reason that kept coming up during my personal search was that because it mirrors the standard work schedule for parents. And so that is why it's what we need to have kids in school those 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, because that's how most parents, at least in our country, that's how their work schedules are. And so it has to mirror that. So I thought that was interesting. But I think starting off with what homeschool socialization looks like would be a great place to start. And then we can kind of go into a bit more about what it looks like in the classroom. And then you can do your own sort of deciding on, what you see, depending on if you're a parent or a teacher or a homeschooler. So one of the things that we talked about, I know the stereotype that homeschoolers are isolated, socially awkward, it's a very outdated assumption, and that traditional schooling is often viewed as like the primary avenue for children to receive social skills. Right. But that socialization is not merely, being around other people. It involves developing communication skills, empathy, adaptability, the ability to navigate diverse relationships. So homeschooling offers a lot of really unique opportunities to foster those abilities in super meaningful ways, very different than the average traditional school setting. And so some of the ways that we build these skills is one, engaging with mixed age groups. So, there is more effort that goes into it as a homeschooling family, finding those friendships and those groups that you want to be a part of. But you're out with other homeschooling friends or other, kids in the community, or just your community, not necessarily children, but just with other people that you're, in the space where you live, being social. And those interactions are much more genuine and authentic because they're in the real world space. So they're having a lot of, play dates with other homeschooling children who might be the same age, who might be a little older, might be younger, or there might be a huge range of ages all playing on the playground or in a music group together or something. They're also having a lot of interactions with different ages because of our time out in the community. I mean, the participation in community is the next one, and extracurricular activities, but it's sort of like they're exposed to a mixed age of people, which is very much more authentic to how the world works, because when you do look at it, the only time you're ever isolated in a group of all kids the same age is when you're separated into those school groups. And so they're constantly having access to different age groups, and it's such a beautiful thing to witness as a homeschooling parent, because you see, they're learning from older children, they're being kind of like the guide for younger ones, so they're kind of feeling that sense of autonomy and independence, and they like being kind of in that teacher role, but they're constantly being exposed to different mixed age groups, whether it's a specific activity they're doing or whether it's because we're out in the community a lot more. It's on a day-to-day basis. We're not set in a classroom, for all those hours. That they're genuinely able to communicate effectively in these diverse situations because we're just having so much more practice with it.
Yeah. And I think working with younger, kids, if you're on the playground or having a play date with younger kids, it also teaches a little bit of that empathy and perspective taking, right? To sit and in the moment be able to teach, that 2-year-old, or probably not that young, but maybe 3 or 4-year-old, when you have a 9-year-old, okay, so so this is how they're seeing the situation. This is how you're seeing the situation. And using that as a teachable moment is really powerful. And then, I think diversity as well as, race and, cultural differences, typically, depending on the community that you live in. I know our communities tend to be predominantly white, but having the opportunity to go out into other communities and meet friends that are, just different is really powerful. And then, my kids are able to come with me to work and see some neurotypical kids. And, we have a really unique opportunity for them to, see what other learners look like, and they act like. So, I think it's a really powerful thing. There's also not this competition. I don't think I've ever been out and with a homeschool group and be like, well, I'm 10. How old are you? Because I think that, I know we'll get into it a little bit more, and not to, necessarily be super negative, but I think that comes from school, right? Like you're separated into grades. You eat lunch in pods of your grade. You might be on the playground with 3rd through 5th grade, but you very clearly can see like the 5th graders play with the 5th graders and the 3rd graders play with the 3rd graders. So there isn't a lot of mixing of age groups, and it becomes this competition. I think from a very young age.
And if there is mixing, because I think I know from my time in school, and it's wonderful when it happens, but again, it's not authentic. It's very structured. It's when it would be something like the bigs and littles, your 3rd graders buddy reading with nursery kids, and they're, and it's a wonderful moment, and it's great. And they each pick out books and they sit with a nursery kid and they're reading, and then they play on the playground, and it's great. And it might be a wonderful afternoon. One, it's probably happens, I don't know, 2 or 3 times in the whole school year, and the other is it feels very fake, because it's just it's a super it's a forced interaction. It's there's all this responsibility placed on the big ones before they play with the little ones. It's just it doesn't feel, I don't feel like they get. I think it's posed in a certain way, like, oh, look at this wonderful interaction, and the interaction itself I think is fine, but what are they really learning from it? I don't know. I don't think that having 3 afternoons out of a whole school year where you're reading a book with a younger child is giving you that sense of, like you said, empathy or acknowledgement of kind of your your autonomy and your difference as being older, and kind of bringing that maturity into a situation. I don't think that that's giving them that necessarily just from those 3. That would be something if the school was doing a lot more of that, that would be great, because I think that's really important. So, if the school was doing a lot more of that, I think that would be, that'd be great, because I don't think that it has to be impactful and make a difference. And I think you see that with a lot of homeschooling kids, in the context of the real world socialization, which is kind of going along our list of how they build social skills, is that time that they're out in the real world doing various activities, grocery shopping with you, returning items at Home Depot, watching your parents if they run a business, or that they, how that all works, learning to interact with different people and neighbors, like in a more authentic, genuine setting. And I think that those opportunities are where real learning happens, even if it's a whole lot less. I think, that's sort of the next idea, but focus of quality over quantity, and that you have those times that may not be as frequent, but there's nothing to say that they need to have such constant interaction with kids in order to gain those social skills. And in fact, I would argue that it's kind of the opposite. And I think I had given you that analogy of the like the pool situation, where it's like, if you get a kid, this is one thing I would say to parents sometimes, or anybody that would ask about the socialization, and they really genuinely wanted like a good analogy, even though no analogy is perfect, I would give them this one of swimming lessons. And I would say, if you've got a group of 20 kids and you bring them to a pool and you put them in the water 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, there's one adult there who's overseeing and making sure nobody drowns. But really, it's they're figuring out how the water works and how to swim on their own. You'd probably get about 5 kids that will figure it out. They'll figure out moving their arms allows them to, stay afloat, kicking their legs, holding their breath. They can go under. They'll figure it out. They'll, navigate the waters. You'll probably have another 5 that never leave the shallow end, because that's where they feel comfortable and safe. You might have 5 that always hang on to the edge, and then you've got the remaining 5 that sit on the edge with their feet in the water, but never go much farther than that because they're not comfortable. And so it doesn't matter the fact that they're at this pool 8 hours a day, 5 days a week.
The access, right?
Yeah, the access is there, but you're still going to get a very diverse ability, because no one's they aren't individually being supported or encouraged in the way that they need to be, because they're all different. They're all different. So, they're all going to figure this out differently. Whereas if you have a different group of 20 kids, they're only at the pool 2 hours a week. But those 2 hours, they are given an individual instructor. They're getting very explicit instruction on how to swim, different strokes, the way that you move in the water, hold your breath, all this stuff. You're going to get almost 100%. I mean, that they know how to swim. I mean, they may not all love it, but out of that second group, you're going to get, they're all going to know how to do it. Right. And so that's, to me, a perfect example of where it's quality over quantity, and that, purely by sending your child off to school to be with kids in the vicinity of other kids does not equate positive social skills or interactions, which I know we're going to talk a little bit more about. And if anything, I think there's a lot of examples that I've heard personally from parents who do send their kids to school, or parents who are homeschooling that have taken their children out and have said that it's more the opposite. For every positive social interaction their child has, there's unfortunately 5 or 6 negative ones that they have to sort through. And, in our current setup with teachers having, 20 plus students in their class, it's not the teacher's fault. There's no way for you to target and hit every single child where they are with their social abilities and skills. And there's also a lot to be learned about how to effectively communicate social skills with children. And I know that where I've taught, there's been specific social curriculum that we've had to work with.
Right.
And I will tell you that there is no connection between the lesson and then seeing it out in practice, because we could do a whole lesson with, on communication, and we could role play it and read a book about it and talk about it in the classroom, and the kids are going to tell me everything that I want to hear because they know what to say. They know what you say to a child. How are you supposed to treat a friend who's sad or whatever? Or are you supposed to listen to other people? Of course. I mean, they're gonna say everything that you want to hear. But then they go onto the playground and they can't get along to save their lives because they're in context of, learning that skill and, how it's supposed to be done. They're doing it in a very false kind of way,
right,
contrived
way,
right. And then when they're actually asked to, they don't see the connection of, oh, well, this is actually how I'm supposed to do it out in the real world. They don't make that, they don't translate it. And so how effective or important are those? I mean, are you really just wasting? Sometimes I remember feeling it was kind of a waste of time, because it was like, yes, it had good intentions, but it wasn't sticking to them in the way that it needed to be. And so it sort of makes you wonder, well, what's the point? If they're not learning this and it's not sticking, they're not using it in the real world, what's the point of doing these sort of contrived social lessons that are very, they're not, how powerful are they if the kids aren't practicing them in the real world? And with homeschool kids, it's the exact opposite. Because they're learning those social methods in the moment.
Right. Yeah. No, and I think that's a great point that, if you are working, and I know we'll get more into obviously what it looks like in the classroom, but if it is a very contrived and scripted, a lot of times as a teacher, you're working through your rituals and your routines of how to get along within the context of a classroom. And when you take the classroom out, it doesn't generalize, like you said, to these other settings, whether it's the bus. I can't tell you how many issues there were on the bus, on the playground, before school, during before school care or after school care. It just doesn't generalize. There's not enough practice in those settings. Explicit instruction in those settings. There's just not time. So I think, just like you said, having access to multiple different environments in that real world socialization, it's invaluable.
And then overarching, and I think feeling and need and desire for children to fit in, when they're in that construct of a school setting, that I think is very different when they're in a homeschool setting. I don't think, I know personally that my children, I've seen it because for my oldest, he was in school for a little bit, how that forced interaction, that exposure to kids all that time, did the opposite. It actually made him close in and made him, because it was too much. It was too much expected. It was too much social interaction, and that he ended up coming out of his shell so much more once we were doing more like play dates, and he had a couple hours, you know, on this day, and then we had a nice day at home, and then the next day we would do something else again. He was much more able to rise to the occasion in those moments, because it was shorter lived. He was like, I can do this for a while. And then as the parent, you know, when you're on the playground with them, or they're having a play date, or they're in a, you know, co-op setting, and you're doing a group together or a class, and, you know, a problem arises, this is where you capitalize on it. You're there to sort of help, you know, lead your child in the direction that they need to go with learning these social skills. A teacher can't do that for every kid, and it can't be expected of them to. It's not fair to expect a teacher to. And, you know, nobody ever has more issues than at a recess situation. And, you know, I mean, I've literally seen teachers say, when a child has come up to them and been like, so-and-so's, you know, not being nice, we're not getting along, you know, this is hurt my feelings, blah, blah, blah. Saying to a child, okay, you've got 5 minutes left of recess. So do you want to play, or do you want to just like talk about this for the last 5 minutes? Well, the kid goes and plays, but that's the teacher I mean, and again, I'm not faulting the teacher. Like, that recess can be, if you're on recess duties, should be, you know, kind of a mini break for you as well, to be able to just breathe. But it's like, you know, that child's getting nothing or no support from a teacher in that moment, because they're just being shoved off with like, well, it's not such a crucial idea, so figure it out, you know. And when that happens just over and over and over and over and over again, you know, eventually that child will stop going to the teacher for help when they come to a certain grade, you know. And you know, and it makes me sad they won't have learned, you know, that skill. Whereas if that had been a homeschooling situation and your child came to you with an issue, you know, this is a chance to teach them that, and chances are they won't have the problem again, you know, at least now they've got some other coping mechanisms. But I can really speak to firsthand, like I have been in situations where I have literally just taught a lesson, like a social emotional lesson, and then gone out to recess and it was like we had never done it. It was like because it was so isolated within the classroom. They told me what I wanted to hear, and then out in practice, it was completely different. And I think that goes to just a theory of learning in general, like, right, it's all through practice. And I don't mean practice by role playing in the classroom. I mean practice like you're out playing and this issue comes up. Like, that's when these, you know, things need to be taught. And that's when you grab kids in the moment of when it's happening. And, you know, I'm sure that there are teachers that do it from time to time. I did, but I also know there was many times that I had to kind of, I couldn't do it all at once, you know. It's not possible. So, you know, and I don't know if parents who are sending their kids to school are assuming that every time their child has an issue that it's being addressed, but unfortunately, I mean, the reality is it's not. Not all the time, and you know, and maybe you're okay with that as a parent, and that's your choice. But I just I know that these homeschooling relationships, you know, what we always want for our kids, I think every parent, you know, they want them to be happy and grow authentic, strong friendships and relationships. And I think with homeschooling kids, they have a better chance to do that, because the friendships aren't based off of just proximity, same grade, we're learning the same thing. You know, they're actually finding people that they enjoy being around, you know, learning from each other. You know, they don't see each other as often. So when they do get together, you know, it's camaraderie around their friendship. And I think it's longer lasting. Like when I think of friendships that I had growing up, of which I hate to say I don't have any friends now that I had when I was in school. I know some people do, but I personally don't. And, you know, I think it's hard, or why I hear all the time adults struggle with friendships or maintaining friendships, unless there's a proximity, like it's somebody you work with, or you've got something, you know, super in common. Like that you do together, or you're in something together, because then the friendship falls apart afterwards, because you don't know how to continue a friendship unless there's those elements to keep it together. And so you get these kids that are in a situation in school where that's how they learn how to make friends, and then school ends, and it's sort of like, well, how do I keep friendships going at this point? Because I'm so used to seeing my friends all the time. So and
I think that the one piece too is, again, it goes back to that, like, proximity to peers does not equal access or learned social skills. And, kids can be best friends. I'm sure everybody's heard, oh, so-and-so is my best friend. They're best attached at the hip in first grade. And then in second grade, they're in different classrooms. And now it's like, now they never see each other and they never talk. And it's like, that was, such a missed opportunity. And then I think, to your point about adults maintaining friendships, were we ever explicitly taught how to make and maintain friends? No, you just kind of chatted with the buddy next to you, and then okay, you were relieved that somebody wanted to talk to you too, and that was and that creates a lot of anxiety too. I think, I know for me it did in school, worrying about who's going to be my friend, who am I going to sit next to. So it's nice when you have like a homeschooling community, that kids are able to have access to them, and form those quality friendships. And if it doesn't last or maintain for whatever, then that's a learning opportunity as well, to just be like, okay, well, let's talk about maybe why you don't want to play with so-and-so anymore, or why that person isn't your friend. And having those healthy conversations around what it means to have a relationship, and then that can obviously grow into when they get older and things like that. So it gives them more time too to be, I think that's an important piece when you've got kids that are in school for such long days, or in a lot of extracurriculars, or doing stuff on the weekends. Time is to be with themselves and to sort of learn about what they're looking for in a friend. Like I know you had mentioned that before, when you've had conversations with your kids about what does it mean to be a friend, but what are you looking for in a friend? And this sort of mantra that I think is spewed out in schools a lot, like, oh, we're all friends here, we're all of course, not everybody in the classroom is friends. I mean, you would like it to be that they're not enemies, and that we have common ground, and that we're respectful to one another. But that forced idea that we're all friends, I think it gives kids a false narrative about what friendships are and relationships are. And and you and I both went to traditional school, and we're the first to tuck our heads, like we said, in the market, and we're surrounded by people. But right.
And you hear that. I remember seeing on social media lots of funny reels about that, about particularly our generation, but like really being adverse to social interactions. And it's like we went through the kind of traditional school system, and so to me, I'm hoping for a healthier way forward with socialization. And I, so far in my journey, such as it is, I've seen that. So, so those are just a few of the ways I'd say, generally, with homeschoolers, building social skills. They engage with mixed age groups, participation in community and extracurricular activities, real world socialization happening, in the real world, real time, real context, and then the focus on quality over quantity, that there's no reason why so much amount of time with other kids makes any difference in their social journey. So before we go into what it looks like in the classroom, was there anything else that you had to add to?
No, I think so. I know. I think we can definitely talk a little bit more about what it looks like in the classroom. I know we've already kind of touched on it a little bit. So, I can't tell you how many times as a school teacher, you're just saying something like, stop talking. This isn't social hour. Stop talking. We're not talking about that right now. Redirecting in the classroom about, it's time, we're working quietly. And then even if there is, talking and interactions during lesson time, it's usually around some sort of problem that they have to solve together. Again, in that very contrived way. Here's this math problem, work together to solve it. And again, as much as you'd like that to contribute to, okay, everyone should share and turn and talk, and what it means to be a part of a group and all of that kind of stuff, you do some of that, but it's in such a contrived way, and you're also kind of putting kids together. I don't know, it just feels that, like you said, just sort of a little bit fake at times. I don't know. So that's kind of one of the things that I think of when I think of socialization in the classroom. It's very much like there are very specific times where you are free to talk and share and build your own friendships.
And that's why it's funny when I hear, there's a lot of reasons why people might want to send their children to school. I don't totally understand when they put socialization as like one of the top reasons.
Right.
Right. So when people say they, sending their kids to school for other reasons, I can jump on board at times with different things. But to say that, one of their main reasons is socialization, I think is that's what gives me pause because of a lot of what we talked about,
right.
But also looking at the times, right, as a teacher, the time, this is not social hour or stop talking. If anything, a lot of that social time is, it has a more negative connotation. And I can remember actually for my son, this was in preschool, one of the reasons why he said he really didn't want to talk was because he just never knew if it was a time he could talk and he didn't want to get in trouble. And I was like, well, that's interesting. I never thought of that.
Yeah.
But it's true. I mean, even when you think of parent-teacher conferences, when you've got a kid that you're using that terms, such a social butterfly, loves to be social. It means that they won't stop talking and they're probably getting a lot of redirection because they're constantly wanting to be social, which is not a bad thing. Kids should have that freedom, but they can't be doing that in school, not all the time. Right. And those, I think we actually broke it down. So a typical 8-hour school day in an elementary classroom, you might have, and this is if you've got an afternoon and a morning recess, maybe 45 minutes of an unstructured social time, because lunch can't actually be counted. Because especially in early childhood or elementary, teachers are harping on kids to not be talking because they need them to eat. They've only got 20-something minutes and they got to eat.
Right.
So that's not even, an unstructured time to just be social. And then when you think about all those things, we have so much, so many group projects and we do so much, collaboration and discussion in the classroom. That's wonderful, but that's also not blanket social time. That's time that they're interacting with others in a specific way. Right. It's not a bad thing at all, but you can't count that as this time where they're learning how to be social because that's not the same. That's not the same thing.
The purpose of those activities, right, is for them to solve a problem and learn something in the lesson, right? It's not time to work on our social skills. It's sort of like a secondary goal. Like okay, if they all, how did my group work together on a scale of 1 to 4? Let's rate, and that's just kind of a little aside. And if you have that rubric, that's fantastic. But again, you're working together to solve this very specific problem. The teacher's probably moving around and redirecting. If you get off topic and you're talking about a shared interest and trying to make a friend, that's going to be redirected and reprimanded. We're not talking about, sneakers right now or Stanley. What about the problem? Tell me about the problem. We're not talking about our weekend and our dog. We're, tell me about Betsy and her math problem or whatever it might be. So, I think that's a really great point, that it's your main goal of those group projects is not working together in a group. It's whatever the outcome, the goal of the lesson is. Right. And they do it in a group because that's just the modality that they want to teach it in.
Right. Right. And even, we have so many open discussions and things like that. And, we listen to one another and we're practicing that. And that's all well and good. Will that happen if the teacher's not there, or if it's not specifically a topic that's being, addressed in the moment? There might be an incentive because as kids get older and they are very much aware of grades, they're thinking about the grade that they might be getting or receiving, or if they're a people-pleasing child, which many of them are, they want to please the teacher. But, there's not, just because a child is interacting in a positive way with their group during a group project doesn't mean that they're translating those skills. So when they're given the freedom now to create a game on the playground where, the teacher's not monitoring the whole thing, it's not being, there aren't these 4 elements that have to fit together. There's a lot more freedom. It doesn't always translate. And so, I definitely think that scripted way that kids are interacting, it cannot fall under the term of being socialization. It just can't. It might be very positive what they're doing, and they're
interacting,
and maybe they're learning an academic skill or topic that's really important. I think that's great, but again, just can't put that under the bracket of socialization.
And I think maybe that's where the nuance is that when people say oh, don't you want your kids to be social or whatever, they're saying don't you want them to have access to other kids? Right. Don't you want them to interact with other kids? Right. Yes, they can go to the playground and interact with other kids, but when we're really parsing it down, and I think that's why it was so important that we really took a second to define socialization. When we're talking about them, developing friendships, meaningful relationships, being able to actively problem solve, that's more than just interaction, So I think that's an important distinction for sure.
Right. And again, like we talked about like incentives or why, like what's the why to getting along with other people? Like,
Right.
you know, why do I need to be nice to somebody if they're not nice to me? I mean, that's where it comes into that idea of morals and values and things that your family or your parents, you know, might be more of should be more of a part of, you know, helping you figure out versus the teacher, you know, because sometimes, I mean, I can remember being asked questions at times that were very hard to answer because it was like, that's not really, I don't know if I didn't feel like it was my place or, you know, to impart why we needed to show kindness to somebody that was being so rude to us or why we needed to walk away from something that was, you know, because it felt like that was more the role of what a parent should be doing and probably would be. And I'm sure did do, you know, when those times arose. But the thing is that a lot of those confrontations with kids happen in school and the parents are not there.
Right.
And so either the opportunities, like you said, missed or it's somewhat mediated by the teacher, but not in the way that really it needs to be.
Right.
And it's just kind of putting out the next fire, you know, rather than figuring out what's causing the fires to start. So, you know, I definitely think that despite, you know, and this is not it's very hard. This is the one myth I think that's really hard to talk about and not feel like you're on like a war, like one side or the other of, because it's tough to support it in the homeschooling network without condemning it in the institutional school setting network. And this isn't to say that there aren't, you know, kids that do well, you know, in school. There's not, I think schools, a lot of them do make an effort to try to teach some of these skills. I just, you know, now being a homeschooling parent and looking back and reflecting back on my years in the classroom, personally, I see how drastically different it is and how subpar it was in the classroom compared to what it can be when you homeschool. And, you know, again, we're very fortunate that we have the lives we have and the ability to homeschool the way that we do, and not everyone does. And so, but I just think that it's a myth that is very easily debunked if you put any effort into looking, or even asking yourself some questions like we did at the beginning about like, well, why do they need to be in school for this long of a time? Or, you know, am I really sending them there to be social, or am I, because I can remember parents telling me sometimes when I would have a conference about their child, you know, really being very social and love to have, you know, talk and whatever. And they're like, I know, I tell them all the time to be quiet when they're in school and it's like, you know, so you just got to ask about, well, what are you sending them there to school for? And I don't think a lot of parents, I think they want them to have friends. They want them to be, you know, well liked, and they want them to have opportunities to be with other kids. But I do think at the crux, they're like, no, I want them to receive an academic education.
Yeah,
and, you know, I do think that is probably more important. So it's just funny how usually the first thing out of someone's mouth when they hear that you're a homeschooling parent, unless they're also a homeschooling family, is often about asking. And sometimes very genuinely, they want to know the answer. They say, you know, what about the interaction with kids, how you get them to socialize, and yet, like we've just kind of debunked now, it's not that hard of a question to really think about it. It's like, well, what do you mean? Like a lot of parents will joke, homeschooling parents, I do it to socialize. I want them socialized, but this way, not that way. Right. So anyway, it's definitely one of, or the biggest probably homeschooling myth that you will come across if you're a homeschooling parent, or if you're thinking about homeschooling. But it's definitely one that, you know, inform yourself about. Sometimes people will have a very clear cut sort of like two-liner that they throw out there, especially if they feel like they're asked this a lot, you know, by pediatricians or family members, or, you know, for friends that still send their kids to school and you've, you know, now gone down a different path. But, you know, having some kind of a response, try not to get too defensive about it. It's very easy to get defensive, and I have at times, because it's just, it's easy to have that happen. But,
and I think, you know, again, it's fine if people want to disagree with, you know, your decision to homeschool. That's totally fine. You know, if you wanted to say like, oh, well, I don't agree that homeschooling, fine. But I think, you know, if it's again, like if this myth is why, then I think it's kind of a part of our job as homeschoolers to kind of shed a little light on, well, actually that's not the case. So you can still disagree with me. You can still say that this isn't the option that you would choose for your child, or you think that I'm making a mistake or whatever. You're entitled to your opinion. That's fine. But let me shed a little light on what actually is going on here, and then feel free to continue on with your opinion about however you think I should be. You know, schooling my child. So, and
I think that we came up with these specific 4 myths that we're going to talk about, socialization being the first one. We came up with this small list of them because I think that we had both known people who, if it wasn't because of these 4 myths, might have the confidence to start homeschooling. But because of these these 4 categories, socialization being one of them, they really feel adverse to it and think that it's not a possibility, even though there's something in them that's, really interested in going down this avenue, where they're really unhappy and they're seeing their child struggling and really unhappy in the current setup. But yet these myths are keeping them from it. And that's so painful for us because we know that they are just that, they're myths. So shedding the light on it from a perspective,
definitely
looking at and
empowering all of you to, if you're considering homeschooling or maybe never thought about it and just happened to stumble upon our podcast, just having the knowledge and again, like having the confidence to say like, oh no, actually I could do this, and this is actually what it looks like, and it's all homeschooled kids are not weird.
Right. So socialization and homeschooling, it is a myth. You do have to put in some more effort as a parent, to find your group of people that you want to hang out with. Thankfully, in today's day and age with, social groups online, there is a huge rise in homeschoolers kind of across the nation. So, it's not as hard we found each other at a play place, indoor play place. Yeah. There's more homeschoolers around than you probably anticipate, but even the access to finding groups online is it's endless, whether it's a co-op or just like a mom's group or just a library meetup, or there's a lot out there. And building kind of a small group, it is a responsibility on you, and maybe that's part of it. Parents feel like, I don't want that, I'm kind of an introverted person and I don't think I could. I will say that I know when we started, that was a piece of it. I was like, I gotta get out there, I gotta meet people, I gotta and that is a bit of a pressure on you as a homeschooling family to make that happen, because it may not just on its own. If you're, you want to have these opportunities for your child, and as a homeschooler, you have to kind of create them at the beginning, and that might, feel
a little uncomfortable,
or be too much for parents. I don't know, but that is the reality of it. You have to be willing to do that.
I will say too, like 95%, that's just a number that I'm pulling out of thin air, of other homeschool parents kind of want the same thing, right? They want their kids to have access to other kids. And so, if you happen to meet them in public, you exchange numbers and try to get together. And again, it's just another one of those examples of just a real world interaction and a new interaction with kids that maybe we don't know. And so developing their confidence and be able to show up somewhere and to play with kids that they've never met before or only met in passing, that's really, I feel like that's really good for them, especially if you're there to support and coach and you're modeling it, right? Like, we don't know each other, so we're gonna go, but I'm gonna model for my kids that, I ask questions and, I listen intently. And so how can you do that with the friend that you're playing with? So I think that, a lot of other homeschoolers have the same goal. And so if you are feeling a little nervous about trying to find your group, just kind of getting out there and don't be afraid to sort of kind of, sidle up to somebody awkwardly and be like, hi, I'm so-and-so and I'm homeschooling my kids and tell me about your kids. And, could we maybe, meet up another time? It's okay, because it's probably going to be very well received, because I think we've all been in that state of anxiety for at least a second of, oh no, what if we can't get them to make friends? What if we don't find our group? I know I did. I was really nervous about that when I first started, and then it kind of just naturally sort of happened. So no,
absolutely. So socialization is a myth, and it's the biggest one that we had to talk about first. The remaining 3 are not as lengthy in conversation, but definitely really an important one to target. So I'm glad that we got that one done first.
So our next homeschooling myth that we've heard when we tell people that we homeschool is, I could never homeschool because my kids don't listen to me. I've heard that one quite a few times. So it's interesting because as a parent, you really are your child's first teacher, and you continue to be their teacher or their coach throughout their lifespan. That doesn't just end. Once you send your kids off to school, you're not done teaching them, in our opinion. You may not be teaching them academic skills, but you're teaching them how to be a member of your household, how to participate in the community, how to have meaningful relationship, whatever it might be, you're still teaching them. So it doesn't homeschooling doesn't change that fact. It just means what you're teaching is just a little bit more and maybe a little bit different than what you would be if they were sent to traditional school. So the important thing with this is to really design a homeschool routine that fits into your family life and finding that homeschool balance. That's really going to be the biggest way for, if you really feel like your kids don't listen to you, which I do feel is a little bit like a myth as to why you wouldn't be able to homeschool. There are some ways that you can work to sort of change that. Figuring out how to differentiate between, your home time and your learning time. Right? They should kind of blend together. I know that there's a lot of models where, reading is happening. It's on the couch and you're just sitting with books and reading, and that's their reading time. So it doesn't have to be so explicit and structured as if it's a mini school at home. It certainly can be, but it doesn't have to be. So, maybe thinking a little creatively about like, oh, how do I differentiate between home time and learning time? And I think the other myth is because, as we talked about earlier, kids are in school for, 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, or 8 hours, or however long, the school day is. It varies. But lower your expectations of the amount of time that you actually are going to spend schooling. As we mentioned, that school day is designed around a parent's work day. Mm-hmm. I don't know that there's any literature out there that fully defends that kids need to have, an hour and a half of explicit reading time every single day to make progress in reading. And even if they do, that's in a group setting, right? So how much more can you really accomplish? You can really do much more in a shorter amount of time. So the younger your child is, the less time that you're going to spend on schooling. There's no need for a homeschooling kindergartner to be having access to learning, 5 days a week for 6 hours a day. That's just silly. And even, up to the high school age, I don't think that there's necessarily any reason for them to be doing 6 hours of schoolwork a day.
Yeah, when I think I can't remember who I was talking to, but it was somebody that was interested in homeschooling, and then they kind of came out with that. It was like, oh, but I could never teach my kid for 8 hours a day. And I looked at them and I was like, you wouldn't be like at all. And and I think that it's so as a homeschooling family too, you kind of redefine what learning looks like, and that's been something that's been tricky for us as former educators, which we talk about later, but. Because we had a very defined idea about what learning looked like and how it had to be, and then we realized that that's the way it has to be in an institutional type setting, because you have a range of learners, you have a whole group that you're teaching to, you have to track certain things in order to get data to show parents and progress. These are your own kids. It's a whole different ballgame. And so we actually had to do some unlearning, and I think I had said at one point how we don't really refer to it as homeschooling, as home learning, because school kind of gives this context of like sitting at a desk and that's when you learn and blah blah blah, and yet we learn throughout the day all the time with different things that we're doing. And so but even that direct instruction, right, it was kind of unique for me because the last teaching position that I held before I homeschooled was first grade. And so when my son, I pulled him out and he was going into kindergarten, so I very quickly, and then the next year was first grade, and so I had just been in that setting, and so it was hard for me not to compare what I would have been doing, in the classroom with him had he been in first grade, and then looking at, the curriculum we were using, the reading skill we were doing, and thinking about how I had just taught this, a couple years prior, the length it took and why it takes so long to do that. And it's because it's the group setting. And so, when you think of the 8-hour school day, yes, there's a huge amount of time that's spent on the academic subjects and it's that way because it's a group. You have to get through all the students, you have to assess, you have to do other things like that. It's very different if it's one-on-one. And the other things throughout the school day, the transitions, the walking, I hate to say it, but like honestly, the walking in the hallway from point A to point B in elementary school, you're sucking up at least an hour of the day. I don't know. Just from those transitions of lining up and walking to different places, it takes up at least an hour of the day. So that idea of it being such a long time ago. They wouldn't,
attend for me for that long. Well, I'm not going to attend to anybody for that long.
No, that's not going to happen. Right. And then, even to the point where if it's that bad that your child does not listen to you, well, now, if it's so horrible that they don't listen, they go to school and they still don't listen to you. I mean, homeschooling is not going to, trying to think about the best way to explain it. It's not like your child and you aren't communicating or getting along and they're not listening to you. Sending them to school isn't going to fix that. That might be something that you need to work on with your child, I would imagine, regardless if you have such a stressed relationship that there is no communication or they don't listen to you in general. And I think what happens with homeschooling families is since we have the time, it's nice that we're able to spend that time with our kids to strengthen that relationship. I mean, I know several parents whose children, when they pick them up, their kids are exhausted. Those few hours they have with them in the afternoons are tough because they're tired and they're hungry and they've spent everything they can in the school day, and they're just, and then the weekends, if they have an activity, and then the Sunday, they're just dead to the world before they have to do it all over again on Monday. And so there isn't even that time to work on that relationship of how we communicate with each other and everything like that. And I think that's actually a really beautiful aspect of the homeschooling nature, that you have the time with your kids to strengthen that relationship and respect towards one another and have a more a better relationship. But yeah, feeling like you couldn't possibly get through to your children, they wouldn't listen to you. As being like the main reason why you wouldn't homeschool. And to me, that kind of signals that maybe there is work that needs to be done with you and your child. You must have some kind of, you must be hitting a head at somewhere that needs to be addressed. If you really feel like there's no way they'd listen to you.
Yeah, and I mean, not to go down the rabbit hole too much, but yeah, what is the function of the child, not listening to you? Is it just because there's so many demands being put on them all the time? And the nice thing about homeschooling is you get a little bit more control over what your day looks like, and the child does too, right? Like, what do we want to learn about? We talked in our last episode about unit studies and that being one of the models of homeschooling. And so what are you interested in learning about? And then it just kind of naturally happens, and there isn't this battle between like, sit here and do this and write your name and spell these words and whatever. You can definitely be a little bit more thoughtful about how you go about your learning time, and relinquishing some of that control to the child, so they have a little bit more autonomy over what they're learning and how their day looks. And I think your point too about them being in school for so long and then just being totally exhausted at the end of the day is a really good point, right? Like, I get exhausted at the end of the day too when I'm done working. I don't want to talk to anybody or like have even more demands put on, or have somebody tell me that I have to go put my shoes away and make sure that I do this, and now it's time to do your homework. Like, it's a lot. So if this is, as Anna said, if this is really your main reason why you can't homeschool, maybe taking a pause and thinking about what is the kind of relationship that you want to have with your child, and if homeschooling and having them have a little bit more control over what they're learning and stuff like that, it would actually help your relationship.
Yeah, and I before we move on, just the last point I wanted to share was just, we're filming this in the fall, and so a lot of families are back at school now, and I would see I felt like two types of parents throughout the summer. Either the ones that cannot wait to get their kid back to school because, the summer's been tough and they got to fill it with activities and they're not used to having them around. And so for a homeschooler, it's very different, obviously. But so you see those parents and they're very happy to send them back, in the fall, and they make funny jokes and clips about it. But then you see another group that would genuinely feel very sad about this time of year and the summer was ending and they're sending their kids back to school. And I spoke with a friend of mine who was sending her child back to school, and she was in that category of feeling a lot of sadness about the school year starting. And I would say, well, why? And she, well, this summer it went so well. We did so much together. I felt like our relationship was better. And I was like, well, why do you think that is? And I mean, the number one thing, you had time together. You had so much more time together. And that during the school year, she's in a bunch of activities and she's, gone all these hours, and their relationship gets really strained. And then it seems like the summer rolls around. She's a little bit older now, but she's in middle school, but the summer rolls around and it's like, they have the time to repair their relationship just enough And then the school year starts again, and all of a sudden it cracks, and it's like it's this really sad sort of wheel that she's on. And it kind of broke my heart, because it was like, well, if you take notice, it's the time you're spending together. It's making that's making all the difference. So yeah. So myth number 2 about my kids won't listen to me, and it does sort of translate slightly into our third one, which is about I'm not smart enough. So if you don't think kids won't listen to you, and you also might feel like you're not smart enough, I've heard many people say, oh, well, you can do the homeschooling because you were a teacher.
Yeah, right. It must be so easy for you.
Yeah. And so other homeschooling parents, if you're not coming from the educational background, that won't be the case for you. But for us, I know you've said that you've experienced it. I've definitely experienced it. And so obviously for homeschooling parents who weren't former educators, they don't hear that, but that's definitely one of the first things I hear, like, well, of course you can do it. And so I would say that there are times when having a teacher background is probably helpful. And then there are definitely times that I think it is a disadvantage. And by no means you have to have a teaching background to homeschool your kids. I will often refer to my time in my master's program, getting my master's in teaching, and how much emphasis was on teaching to a group. Mm-hmm. It wasn't on how to impart academic information or wisdom into students individually. It was how to do that but more in a management of a group setting. How do you differentiate the instruction to a variety of learners? How do you assess accurately so you can really gauge if there's comprehension happening? Mm-hmm. How do you keep pace with those that are excelling, and then those that are, how do you have time to reteach? And I mean, there's a lot of that, but I would say the actual time that might have been spent on like how to teach like I don't really think there was much. It's really more about teaching in the construct of a school setting. Right. And so, I would say that you could take any teacher and they wanted to stop teaching and homeschool their kids, they could do it. I really think anybody can homeschool their kids. Who has a desire to. You have to have a desire to, but you obviously couldn't take any individual off the street and put them in a classroom to teach, because what a teacher has in the classroom is a very specific set of honed skills that mm-hmm. takes a lot of effort and time to harness and navigate and really, strengthen to teach academic information, as well as wearing 1,000 other hats during the day, to a group of kids. And that's hard. That's really hard. Right. And I felt like there was an ease of transitioning to the homeschooling setting where it was like I was doing that, but I just had the one little one in front of me, or in your case, you've got the 2 because you're mm-hmm. twins. And yes, there's some challenges when you've got multiple age groups that are learning at the same time and figuring out your schedule, how that all works. But I wasn't balancing in my head, funny things about like, doing spelling tests and things. I'm like, well, I don't need to do that because I'm sitting doing spelling with them. Right. So I'm well aware of how he's spelling, and certain tools and tricks you learn to be a teacher in the classroom space. That's the majority, I think, of what goes into the practice of being an actual teacher. Yeah. It's about how to teach in an institutional setting to a group of kids. And so, yeah, so the degree in and of itself, it doesn't make me more qualified to be a teacher of my own children at all. Right. To me, it really didn't. It's not the same. Yeah, and I think too, a lot of my background was just sort of like the theory of education. I think when I was in an undergrad, I took like a teaching elementary math, but really it wasn't, again, about teaching like strategies for math. It basically was like, here's some math that elementary school kids do. Now you do it. And so, it wasn't. Yeah. I do remember having this panicked feeling the first time I was going to go in to do like a practicum for, I think it was for social studies, because they always gave us like something that they didn't really care about up front, of just like, here's some social studies. We don't care about this. So it was, and I remember I had the teacher's guide and I had to come up with a lesson. And I remember sitting on the couch and being like, I don't know what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. I don't feel prepared for this at all. And then, it's not something where you're going in and they're teaching you explicitly like how to teach math, to third graders. Right. It's a lot more theory. Right. I think a lot of that comes from maybe like being in the classroom. You sort of learn over the years
that these methods or these strategies or this curriculum is the way, curriculum is telling me what to do. And that would be, we'll probably touch on it, but maybe I'm getting ahead here, but like that would be my recommendation, that if you're really feeling like you're not smart enough, then invest in a curriculum that's going to be very scripted, where like it's going to tell you what to say and what to do, and that you say and do those things, and you're all set. You know, you're not like making things up as you go, unless you really want to be, and then more power to you. That's totally fine.
There's a lot. We have our next episode is a lot on curriculum and our choices and tips for all of that. And we had also talked too about, you know, when you're a teacher in the classroom, unless you're someone that's moving around grades all the time, I mean, you get very good. Like for me, the majority of my teaching was third grade. That's the longest, you know, sense. So I remember I felt by like year 3 or 4, I was like, I really feel like I got this. Like, and curriculum still changed, but like I really felt like I knew the age group well. I had certain projects. I had certain, you know, expectations and anticipation of students coming in, what they would know, what they wouldn't know, areas of similarity. Like every year this seems to come up and this seems to be a thing. Like, but you know, when you're homeschooling, you're changing all the time. So it's not like you're getting masterful at one grade like you would if you were a teacher in the classroom. And, you know, so that's another really big change. And so I don't think that being said, right, nobody has to be a teacher or have a teaching degree in order to homeschool their kids. And then at times, and we've talked about this, that it kind of serves almost as a disservice, because I know, for example, picking a curriculum has taken me forever, and I still question the ones that I'm using because I'm so picky, because I've worked with so many and I'm looking for certain things and I like this and I don't like that. And I think I'm also doing a lot of like transitioning, like training myself to see learning in a different way, because I am so scripted. Unless like my child can put if we're having a conversation on the couch about something, that can't possibly equal learning. Like unless I see him and he does a writing activity after. Like, I gotta see some kind of like. I got to see some product. I got to see a product or something, concrete after to show that learning has taken place. Versus like, no, that's not. You don't need to do that. We went to the aquarium and we saw these whales and we talked about them. Right. He's got to write it down and have a picture so I can put it up somewhere and know that learning took place. But it's like, that's partly one reason why you're trained to do that as a teacher, is because, again, you're right, you've got a whole group. You can't have these conversations with every single one of them, or you want to have a product to show parents, or there's just rules that you have to, have a certain output of things where you don't have that as a homeschooling parent. And so, I think for me, there was a lot of times that I would think about activities or even ways of teaching. For me, teaching writing workshop was one of my favorite ways of teaching writing. And, I still have hopes of doing that more in the future when my kids are a little bit older, but I would have done it with them even younger. And we had played around with doing it a little bit, but it was hard for my littlest one. But like part of that structure is so beautiful in the classroom and it works well in the classroom. But you don't need it if you're homeschooling, because you're doing that writing with your child, and you're having conversations. You're doing, not that there's not like, there, of course there's something to be said about doing work in with other kids and getting ideas and sharing. And when they become a certain age, I think that's going to be much more part of our schedule. But but it would be times that I would sort of think, oh, I have to do it this way, or we've talked about like I got to get this much direct instruction in this day in order to really have it count as, and it's just not the truth. It's just really not the way it is. And if you weren't coming from that teaching background, you probably wouldn't be as such a, like, those thoughts wouldn't be like obsessing in your head all the time, because you're not coming from the culture of the classroom. And so, and constantly comparing, I still do that sometimes. I think about like, if this was in the classroom, would he be doing X, Y, and Z, or should I be pushing more? Because I would expect this if I was in the classroom. Like it still goes through my head a lot less than when I first started, but, it definitely is still there, and it's something that I have to pull back on. And so there are times that I would say it has hindered me with my obsessive thoughts about things. But to the point of, I will, give credit where credit's due. There are times I know I did gain a lot of knowledge about children, having worked in the classroom all those years, about how kids learn, about when to take breaks, about when to separate, curriculum, or when, we've done this much, that we're going to take a break now. See it in you. Like, I won't lie. I think that there is, wisdom that's come with having been in the classroom about children and learning and education. I think there's a kind of a peaceful a sense of peace I have knowing, because I have such a background of kind of like the standards or kind of the way that where kids should be at a certain point.
Right.
And not that I feel like a slave to that, but I just have it in my head, whereas other parents might not be like, well, is that okay? Is this like, he's doing this? Is that good? Is he behind? All those kind of worries. I don't have that, because I kind of have more of a sense of the trajectory of where kids are, and the different types of learners that I've worked with over the years. And so, I definitely can see, and I have being a curriculum specialist and developing curriculum and modifying it and changing it, and, that's something that I love to do. And so I feel very thankful that I have that gift of being able to work with a curriculum and make it and change it and do it on the fly, because, man, we all know, if you're a teacher listening, you make a lot of decisions on the fly that you have to, I think, or even knowing when is enough is enough. If a parent's, reading the rubric or the teacher guide to an activity, and they think they have to hit A, B, C, and D, and you're looking at it and you're like, yeah, we're going to do A and C, but B is just redundant.
Right.
We might have a different sense to,
we're not doing that. Yeah.
Whereas somebody else is like, no, but the teacher manual says I got to do it. We definitely have I think a confidence in making some of those calls, because we did that all the time in the classroom. There are pros and cons to having the teacher background, but the bottom line is that you absolutely do not have to have a teaching background or a teacher degree in order to homeschool your own children. You just don't. Right. You don't.
As you, and your point about with the curriculum guide and stuff like that, I think that's a confidence that comes, right? I mean, that was a confidence that came as a teacher in the classroom, right? That I'm going to, as a first year teacher, I need to make sure that we do all of this, and get this all in, and then by year 3, you're like, no, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. We're not doing that. We can skip that. We can truncate that. So I think as a parent, you also start to learn more about your child and like, okay, they can already do that. So this feels repetitive, or they really don't enjoy this particular part of the lesson, so we're going to switch it up and do it this way. That's something that just comes no matter where you're teaching, just with experience and exposure. And so don't let your own insecurities or feelings about your own intelligence be a reason why you don't homeschool. I think
and it's a great point, because you think back on my first year of teaching, and gosh, I mean, you're right, we got a piece of curriculum, you probably follow it to a T, because you just didn't know. And the more you work with your kids, it's funny when I think about, my kids are very different in a lot of ways, but even certain things, and I often wonder if the curriculum I'm using with Leo will work with my other son, Owen, but even just things like, my older son is super artistic, and my other son is too, but like activities that Leo would have loved in kindergarten, a lot of ones that had to do with like those ones where like you got to find a letter and you dot it with a dot marker. Leo would be all over those. He loved those. Owen can't stand them. Like, does not want to do that. He would rather do any kind of thing else but those. And I'm thinking like, but I got all of them from when I done them with Leo. He loved that activity. It's just so funny. But again, I think of like the beauty, because if they were in a classroom, I mean, if this is what the teacher was doing, this is what you're doing. Whereas I can change it. My kid hates doing that letter activity. I'm going to change it to something else. One kid loved it, but one didn't. So it's funny. They're also different, but you absolutely do not need a teaching degree to homeschool your own children. You do, however, need a willingness to learn and to be, I'm trying to think, like, you have to have a desire to homeschool. You don't just want to pull them out and then sit them in front of a computer screen 8 hours a day. I mean, if that's your supplementing, you have to have a desire to do this, I would say, and it has to be something your family you all want to do. That's going to be way more important. I mean, you could be a teacher with any kind of teaching degree, and if you had no desire to do it with your own children, I mean, then it's not going to work. I mean, that's way more important. That's the most important, your desire to do this with your family and your kids.
And more than likely, the way that you started is not going to be the way that you continue to teach. It's just a learning process, and every year as they get older, you might switch up, the structure or what things look like or what you're doing. I mean, it's always an ongoing process. So just continuing to have that motivation to want to homeschool, and some flexibility around like, this is what it looked like last year, but this year, this is, I think, what we're going to do instead, and just kind of trying to like honing your craft. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, so number 4, our last myth, and this was one that I kind of struggled with a little bit. I mean, I think
I did too.
Yeah, the first one, socialization. I had glimpses of that for sure. Of just like, I don't know, are we going to find our group, and am I making the right decision? Just overall questioning. But this was one that I think also resonated with me. So the myth that we wanted to discuss is that as a homeschooler, your child is going to miss out on those typical school experiences or not have the same school experience. So, field trips or in-class learning or riding the bus. Yeah, exactly. Prom when they get older, whatever. So I think we all have memories of a really fun school day or a field trip that we really enjoyed. And so as a homeschooler, they're not going to have that, right? They're not going to all ride a bus together with their classmates to Mystic Aquarium and be wandering around the gift shop and whatever. So no, they're not going to have that same school experience, but that's kind of the point, right? So if they were going to have the same school experience as a child that is in a public or private institutional school, as we're calling it, then that would be what they would do, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's not going to be the same, and that's the point. Why would you homeschool if it was going to look exactly the same? So for me, one thing that was really reassuring is that when I emailed my school district to kind of talk about like, what do I need to do? I'm considering this. They were very friendly. She wrote back and just said like, oh, well, you can still be a member of like the PTO, and see what school events they can still participate in, like book fair. They have like family book night or something. Like we can still go to that, right? Mm-hmm. Or they do like a trunk or treat, put on by the PTA. Again, we can still go to that. It's a community event, right? Mm-hmm. So especially if your child has already experienced being in your district, this might be something that you would really want to do to ensure that they can kind of maintain some sort of contact or at least some familiarity with those, peers that they've already, been in class with. So when I think about those meaningful, those memories that we have, right? The reason why we remember certain experiences is because we enjoyed them, right? We were motivated, we were interested. And so then I had this thought of, well, imagine if your day was like that every day, right? Right. That your school experience would be totally different. Mm-hmm. And every day would be a day to sort of kind of remember, or you did something that you really enjoyed. And all of those experiences that you can have with your kids because you're not tied to being home for 8 hours or 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. So, a lot of districts are, unfortunately, really focused on skill acquisition through fluency, repeated practice, reading, writing, and math. Those are the pillars. That's what you're getting when you go to school. That's the majority of your day. So all those other really fun things that you might be really interested or motivated, like a cool science experiment or a science lesson or a lesson about history, or I can't even tell you how excited we get when when you're in elementary school and they wheel the TV and every day, like we get to watch a movie. Dating yourself there. Right, I am definitely dating myself, but I think, certain people will remember what I'm talking about. I remember. TV on wheels. Yeah. That was awesome, right? But like, you could incorporate a video any day, right? So I think just kind of thinking about what are the pros, what is it that you're really afraid of your child missing out on, and then thinking about what are some things that they're really going to gain. It would be a really helpful way to seek some reassurance and know that this is a myth, in that it's not that it's a myth that it's untrue. It's just a myth that it shouldn't. It matters. Right, that it matters. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
If you want to be involved, right, with your district, like you said, I think the opportunities are there. And I know there's like legal requirements for what a school has to allow you access to as a homeschooler if you're sending in your, letters of intent and all that stuff. But we are living in 2025. I think back on some of my most favorite things in school that are no longer allowed for safety reasons, like access to outside and reading outside in the afternoon, things that aren't happening anymore because of the world that we're living in at the moment. And like you had said, this massive emphasis on so much structured learning time minutes,
learning.
the minutes that have to count for this and that, long gone are the, Fridays of drop everything and read, and, you just get to look at the poetry books or something. I don't know. Those times are so, frequent and far between now because there's just such a pressure on skill acquisition. And, so those times that are really, memorable for me, like, right, if there was a time where you got to wear PJs to school or something as kind of a reward or whatever. Again, so when you think about it, like how many of these experiences were ones that really either mattered in the long run or shaped you in a positive way? I mean, I know, I think that comes up a lot when people say about like high schoolers and prom and this, and I would be not a different person in any way had I not gone to prom. If anything, I might have saved myself from some bad experiences. I mean, like it wasn't for me. It wasn't this pivotal, monumental, soul-shaping event. So once I kind of made a list of some of those like experiences, I was like, did that change me as a person? Like, no, it didn't. And the amount of experiences that you're allowed to, or that you get to have, or your child gets to have as a homeschooler, to me, far outweigh any of those moments in school, like. Because they have these experiences all the time, in different ways, and the magic of that. And if you want to set up a tent in your living room and have them do a reading day down there, like whatever, like you can incorporate anything that you want, and it kind of makes the whole process more exciting and magical than just this one day or whatever, which again are probably fewer and farther between. Right. The other piece of that too is that we had talked about, even in our own experience, times where kids are rewarded in school for a special kind of activity or a movie afternoon, or they've earned a reward for whatever, and that depending on the class they're in, that may or may not happen. Like the years that you've got kids who might have earned a reward that unfortunately has to be taken away for either a safety reason or the group that you have, you have no control over what class your child is in. And I've had groups some years that it is a tough group, and man, I had to be very strict and rigid. A lot of those fun free-for-all moments, didn't happen because of the group that I had, and to manage them safely, it had to be kind of what it was. I couldn't give them a lot of leeway. And then I had years where I would have a class where it was the opposite. They were, I was able to do a lot more fun things because there was a different level of comfort in the class. I had maybe more mild-mannered kids, or I don't know what it was, and you don't know what group your child's going to be in. And there's nothing like having to take away a reward or cancel an event or something, that a child's looking forward to, especially, you can't help it as a parent thinking about your child. And if they weren't part of whatever, the problem was or the issue, and yet now they're reaping the consequence. We can't do this. We're not having this movie thing. You've lost this reward or because of another group of kids that were, not behaving or weren't acting safely or whatever it was. And, that's gut wrenching. And I can remember as a child that happening, not to mention the countless times that I have to sit through lectures from teachers about behaviors or other things that I was not a part of. And that, I had to give them, I can remember as a teacher having to give them, because you got to give them to the whole class. You can't just, can't always just take out the couple that were, causing the problem or, whatever the upset was. So I just, those few memories that I do hold on of kind of like special moments, I find very easy to recreate or create a new way at home. And then some of those pivotal ones, like riding the bus. When you really, is that what does it matter if your child never rides the bus? Like, really? I kind of was like, that's just like, get out of your head. Like, I didn't think that makes doing a difference. And then I will just, the prom, I have to say, there are so many co-ops, certain things, like science fairs, like you said. There are so many co-ops that particularly, put those things on their agenda. Even proms. I know many high school homeschoolers, whose kids have gone to a prom that a homeschooling co-op put on. And to give them an experience of a dance like that, and some people took part, some didn't. It's kind of up to you if you want. But
we've done like the science fair. We did like an international fair. We did a states fair, which again, like, I don't know how much of that is actually even happening. I've been out of the classroom for a little bit now, so I definitely could be wrong that those events are happening more often, but.
Or if it's happening, there are so many kids, and mine I know would be two of them that may not take part in certain events like that because of the culture of school, being more introverted, being more quiet, being a little more fearful, not as confident in certain ways. Whereas like when we do them with the homeschooling group and they're going to this event with me and with every, you know, and we've worked on it at home, there's a different comfort with it. They feel like, oh, this is something I want to engage in. I think there's a lot of kids that don't take part in even those optional fun activities because of either the culture of like a bullying culture, you know, they're worried about the social piece of it, you know, being there, or they're just there's an emphasis on winning something, or I don't know, whatever it might be, and they just don't want to. So some of those fun opportunities aren't even things that students are taking part in because they don't want to do it.
Yeah. And then there's other opportunities, like we were saying, just, you know, I know one of our homeschool groups did like a not back to school beach day. And like, that's really fun, right? Like, you know, another really cool thing that you wouldn't necessarily get to go to the beach if you were not go to the beach and play. You'd have to go to the beach and maybe find some ocean creatures or whatever if you were going with your school. But just there's so many different opportunities for different experiences, right? And so the point is that again, like we said, it's not a myth in that it's not true. It's just a myth, and like you said, that it actually matters. And that you can't do something about it. Like, we don't want anybody to feel really helpless that, well, I'm just going to send them to school because they're going to have these experiences, and if I homeschool, they're not. Like, no, but you can do something about it, right?
Yeah, you can recreate many of the experiences if you really feel like you want them to have that, if you really need to, or you might come around to the reality that you don't, or they don't matter. And then I think it was great what you said too about the, you know, some of those memories or like favorite years that I spent in school. And I think back to something you were learning about because I loved it and I was so into it. And I loved the activity we did around it or something like that. It was about, because it was something I was interested in. So that's part of the nature of the homeschooling, and is feeding off of your child's interests, especially when it comes to certain topics like history or science or things like that. And so how great is it that we get to give them that, because we're kind of, you know, following a little bit of their lead when it comes to some of their interests, not with everything, but, and so, you know, my children animals have been such an obsession of theirs for a while now. And so we're doing science this year on animal adaptations, and that's what a lot of it is. And just, because it's such a huge interest of theirs and focus and love. And so, imagine if you were able to give your kid that opportunity versus, oh yeah, I remember in second grade, I loved this unit because it was something I really enjoyed. That's all you remember. That's the only thing you liked. Whereas the rest of it was stuff you didn't. So, and it definitely, I mean, it's not a moot point. I mean, that the world we live in today, that there is less and less opportunities for anything but structured learning because of the environment of safety and what you know is required now of teachers and keeping those groups safe, and you know, accessibility to outside schools that used to really promote their agenda as being a school that really fostered outside time, whether it was recess or outside classroom time or whatnot. I mean, those things have to be limited because of the culture we're in. So, so it's a good one to end with. It's not a myth in like it's not true, but a myth in that it really does have the same degree.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. Yeah.
So we have spent today talking a lot about those myths and misconceptions about homeschooling, and a good amount of time on that pesky homeschooling kids are social, and address some other ones that surround a parent's ability to teach their kids.
I know that, you know, there's a lot of people that have said to me, you know, oh, I would homeschool my kids if, and then insert common myth, misconception here, you know, if they could be more, if they, you know, were access to more socialization, or, you know, if I was smart enough, or if I was a teacher. If I used to be a teacher, I would homeschool my kids too. And so we really hope that this episode has cleared up some of those misconceptions, and again, really shed some light on what is really possible, right? So until next time, keep the lessons light and the moments meaningful.
Thanks for escaping with us.